we've been working on expanding our service team the last few years, and this is something that we're able to help with. We have a utility that we can install on your network that will scan your devices, build up an asset list, build up a hardware profile, and we can tell what's running out there, what has 10, work with you to get that device updated to Windows 11. We'll be able to do that all through our remote agent. If you have on-premise Active Directory, we can push that out through a group policy object and manage everything from our office here. So if you're interested in that, just reach out to your account manager, and we'll get our service team on a call with you. Looking at application compatibility, Microsoft has said that 99% of applications are compatible with Windows 11. If it worked with 10, it's probably going to work with 11. If you had struggles getting it to work with Windows 10, you're probably going to struggle to get it to work with Windows 11. I haven't run across anything myself that hasn't just fully not worked. I would say if you do have that outlier and it just won't work with Windows 11, you have a few options. You can get Windows 10 extended support updates. You subscribe to those. Well, when Windows 10 was released, they had subscriptions that were yearly. And I think they allowed you to do 3 years of extended support updates. So mainly they would just give you security updates. There wouldn't be any feature updates for that year. If you needed another year extended on that, you'd subscribe to year 2, get any security updates again. You can remove the device from the network if the application that you're using is just not internet dependent. You can just unplug the network cable and take it off the network. You can also virtualize the operating system. So if it's on Windows 10, you can just create a VM of that image, and in Windows 11, install the Hyper-V feature, add that Windows 10 virtual machine image in there, and then again, just not give it network access is another way of doing it. But as always, if you do have that mission critical application, go through and make sure you do testing on Windows 11 and then on the feature update. So this next slide kind of touches on that, on what does change. So with Windows 10, what does change with 11 is the cadence is on 1 year for feature updates. So Windows 10, you had version 1809, version 1903, you had all those step versions, and then that turned into 21H1, 21H2, ended with 22H2. That was the last version that got feature updates. With Windows 11, you're just getting feature updates once a year. So right now they just released 24H2. Last year was 23H2. So they kind of keep it on that same cadence. And then the life cycle for those is 36 months on this commercial editions, which is professional and enterprise. There's a little bit of change in the user experience, not much. You really can't tell that all they do is move the start button to the middle of the screen, it seems like. And then there's actually hardware requirements for manufacturers to hit, which we did kind of touch on with the processor requirements, TPM, Secure Boot. Those are requirements on us as manufacturers that need to be met to create a more seamless ecosystem for the consumers. And then there's lots of things that don't change. Modern management in the cloud, just to touch on a few. The service change, management maturity, licensing, all that management framework stuff is kind of the same. Windows 10, the core code is really still there in Windows 11. That's why you see really good application compatibility. So that kind of touches on the bottom of the pyramid we built here. So really making sure everything on premise device-wise is on Windows 11, and at that minimum level that we need to kind of move forward with the modernization. So with Active Directory specifically here, you really want to have that cleaned up before you move on to the other services. If you, the next tier up, Entra Connect or direct joined devices, Connect is what syncs your on-premise Active Directory into Microsoft's cloud. So moving up that ladder, Entra ID is their identity management platform. That's where all of your users exist, all of your device accounts. There's identity security, and we'll go over that a little bit more in depth in a minute here. And then going further up, Intune is your device management platform. So that will manage your Windows devices similar to what an on-premise server would do. You push down policies, you control updates, you just like having a group policy set up from an AD server. And then that ties up into Defender for Endpoint. That's your security control. That's what's managing all the Windows Defender on the endpoints, and we'll talk about that at the end. But everything, like I said before, kind of depends on each level below that. And if we don't have an accurate amount of, or not accurate, but active users coming in, if there's a lot of stale devices, old users that aren't there anymore, you don't want to sync those up into the Microsoft cloud. So really going through and cleaning that up will set you up for success. If you sync up everything the way it is, it can get a little bit confusing to what you should be doing. And if everything is looking well, knowing what your security posture is later. So talking about a little more about Entra Connect. Again, that's a service that's syncing Active Directory up into Entra ID for that management. When you set that up, I'd recommend not going through the just Express settings. You want to go through and customize that. Express settings is just going to throw everything in your AD structure up into the cloud. You likely have service accounts. You might be holding on to some disabled users, things like that don't really make sense to sync. So what you want to do is specify which OUs inside of AD that you want to sync, and then maybe rearrange the structure of those OUs to add some OUs that are for non-syncing users that you don't want to sync up into the cloud. And then when you're going through the setup wizard, you just don't select those as part of the syncing OUs. And then once you're done with that, you'll need to go back through the wizard and then set up what's called hybrid domain mode. And that's what's going to fully sync up your devices that you have you're managing in Active Directory up into Entra ID and further into Intune and then Defender for Endpoint. So that's an important step. If modernizing for you means getting rid of on-premise Active Directory, you can kind of just get rid of the bottom part of this pyramid here. Entra ID and Entra joined devices will kind of be the base here. So you can, instead of joining your devices to your domain, you would join them to your cloud domain, Entra. So that becomes your base level, making sure you have the right, all your devices joined properly, and then they get managed properly going up from there. When you start getting into that step, you do need to make sure you have the proper licensing for 365. And again, in education, once you start getting into these higher levels of service, you need to have A3 licensed to your users. And Microsoft is all user-based license model. So we don't apply licenses to the devices that we're syncing in. So yeah, so focusing on the top three things, And again, this one's from Microsoft, and a lot of times modernization lines up with security or best security practices. So this line or slide outlines what Microsoft has for security practices or services at every kind of tier of, um, from all the way down to the device into the cloud. So there's hardware security. That's where TPM comes in, and then that lines up into the operating system with secure boot or trusted boot, encryption, network security, virus and threat protection. All of these things are going to be built into Windows inherently, but when you get into 365 and modernize, it's really going to enhance the coverage and functionality of these services. What we're going to really focus on then is identity, which again is Entra, your users and devices that are synced there, and then there are other cloud services that come along with that, Intune, talk a little bit about Copilot, and then again Defender. So let's go to the next slide here. There we go. So with identity and privacy, again, those line up with Entra, and there's a couple technologies that are just built into Windows itself that you don't need the cloud for. One of them, enhanced phishing protection with the smart screen. So a lot of times you'll notice if you download a file and Microsoft thinks it's fishy when you try to install it, if it's an executable, it'll warn you that smart screen doesn't like this and makes you jump through a couple hoops to get it installed. But when you start adding 365 into that with Defender for cloud, you start getting smart screen added into links that you get through email, and even attachments can get screened. So a couple of things to call out in here, just the multi-factor authentication. That's the base of where that comes into play with 365 and Entra. Entra is really where the base of that lives. So when you have your account in Entra, your user account, that's where you start setting up your policies to when that user is logging in, to proving that that user is who it is. The password is the first part of that. MFA is the second part of that. And I'll talk a little more about that in the next slide too. Single sign-on, again, that's something you'll configure in Entra Connect when you're syncing Active Directory and in Entra, so that your users, when they're signing into Microsoft sites from their devices on premise, that they won't have to keep signing in. It'll just pass their sign-in through to Microsoft services. And then, we start getting into biometrics and then different authentication types. These are enabled through the identity and privacy piece of this. Again, you really need some kind of management tied to really get this to work well with 365 and the access that it controls. So the nice piece here is Hello for Business, and this is really a device MFA method that you can use. So instead of, cell phones aren't necessarily always an option. This can be good for student devices that are Windows based, that you're trying to figure out how to MFA student accounts. Hello for Business is set up, again, you need to have everything set up in Entra, and then this is where the Intune conversation kind of begins. That device needs to be managed through Intune, and you're able to set up or control Hello for Business settings. So if the device supports biometrics, you can have users set up fingerprint or facial recognition, or you can just go with a good old PIN. You can specify the length of that PIN. I think it's a minimum of 6 characters, and anything with Hello for Business doesn't leave the device. It stays local to the device, so you don't have to worry about people stealing fingerprints, or it doesn't store pictures of your face or anything like that. it's pretty secure in that aspect. So yeah, getting more into the cloud overview. This is where Windows 11 works with cloud services to help organizations strengthen the multi-cloud security infrastructure. It's kind of reading what their paragraph is here. So this is where Entra ID is part of it, but it expands out so much more from there. If you think back to the pyramid that we're looking at, so we're getting into the top 2 layers of that here. So we have a good foundation in Entra where we have all of our users, we have all of our devices, and now we can talk about how to manage and control those devices and those users. So this is where we'll start talking with about the security with Entra and Intune. So we can deploy, secure, and manage devices through the cloud and create those compliance policies for the devices. This used to be called Azure Active Directory. So if you have been out on the internet trying to look for information on this, it's all been renamed to Entra. But a lot of the same things apply. So if you do go out there and find material on Azure Active Directory, it should still apply. So
hey Lucas, I'm gonna
yep.
jump on and interrupt you real quick. How do we disable MFA for the young students? Question in the chat here.
Yep. So MFA isn't going to be set up unless you set it up. Microsoft has started pushing MFA for admins when you're signing into the admin center, Entra, Azure, the full Azure. That's their cloud platform. They'll force MFA for admins that are signing in there. MFA won't inherently be set up for users of any kind unless you set up conditional access policies. So in your conditional access policies, and I was going to talk about that in a minute here too, that's where you really specify what your MFA is and who's required to be a part of that. So what you want to do is create security groups. You probably already have groups maybe syncing from your on-premise Active Directory, but you'll use those groups ideally to force the MFA on. So when you go through that conditional access policy and you select the group that you want it to apply to, that's where you specify it. If you want to, the other way of doing it is you set up MFA for all users and you exclude students. So again, ideally that'd be through a security group that you have set up already for students. You would just do it that way. And I'm gonna go back to my pyramid quick here. Another way that you can bring in users to Entra for Microsoft services is, you know, with school districts, you probably have Google Workspace set up. You might only have student accounts set up there. If you have on-premise Active Directory, you might not have students set up there at all. So what you can actually do is, there's a few different ways of doing it. You can sync your users and passwords from Google to Microsoft. You can Google it. There's a few different ways of doing it. Microsoft has one way that you can run through it. Google, I think, has 2 or 3 ways. If you're in Google Workspace, under users, you might see like a directory sync beta option there. That's one way that works. The best way I found to work is to do a full federation. So you'll need to verify your email domain that you're using in Google in Microsoft's side of things. And when your users are signing into Microsoft services with that account, it'll actually redirect them to a Google login. And then your Google username, password, if you have an MFA set up through there, will work to get you into that Microsoft service. So that's another way of getting users into Entra. And then, then you just either exclude users or students from your MFA policies, or add them in, or add just the faculty in. So kind of working through that monetization, climb through the pyramid, looking at Intune, that's where you'll set up hybrid devices and Entra join devices to sync into Intune. So you do specify what you sync up in there and what your policies apply to. You'll set up policies to just like a group policy object in AD. You can set up to apply to only students. You can apply policies to just staff. Work through compliance things. You might want to make sure that people can't copy things to attached devices, can't plug in flash drives, can't sign into personal accounts, things like that. You'll be able to edit them, control those policies through Intune. And then there are some of these monetization things that you're able to enforce in here. If you haven't looked at local administrator, I went too far. Local administrator password solution called Lapse. That's something you can set up through Entra too. So Microsoft is really working towards a zero touch deployment model for its devices. And I really see that mostly with student devices right now, similar to what you can do with the Chromebook. You can set up, that's the second bullet point from the bottom here, Windows Autopilot. You can set up Autopilot to basically have the student sign in with their email address, and it pulls down all the compliance policies and everything you set up through Intune down to the device and sets up that profile for the user. And then Lapse will allow you to create a local administrator profile automatically that cycles the password for you. Feel like I have another question coming, Anna.
Yeah, every time I go on camera, she's like, "Oh, here she is again." Someone just pointed out to me that the chat was disabled. I did fix that, so it will work now. But somebody had just mentioned in the Q&A that they had excluded and disabled the MFA, and it was still being forced. I don't know if that's something that we can dig into on the webinar, or maybe that would be something you want to follow up with afterwards, Lucas, to see if you could troubleshoot with them and figure out what the issue is.
That might be a follow-up. So Microsoft just recently consolidated MFA into more of a single pane of management glass. You used to be able to do per user MFA. I think you still can, but there's certain things that they've started turning off. You used to be able to do an MFA server on-prem. There's probably 3 or 4 different areas you could control MFA in 365. And some of those older things might be conflicting with what you have set up currently. And I'm gonna try to leave like 10 minutes for questions here. And if we have time, I'll go back to that. Otherwise, I'll follow up later. But Intune is really, and along with Entra, is going to really be the control of those. There's different plans for Intune. The typical one you get with your A3 license is Plan 1. If you want to get really fancy, Intune Suite will be more for like a help desk style environment where you can have a help desk team that they're able to remote into endpoints. You're able to give them privileges without full admin rights, doing different, again, just device management features through Intune Suite. But the Intune Plan 1 will handle most of your items that you'd need. Another nice thing with Intune is just they've really advanced the application deployment catalog. So you can use Intune to set up application profiles. So if you're a teacher getting a device, it will recognize that through a group and give them an application suite installed on their device. You can actually import your own applications, create an application package that you can push out. But I'd say it's really handy for pushing out Office if you're getting into the 365 apps side of it. Deploying that through Intune is pretty seamless. And then this is getting into, again, the apps and services. And I wanted to highlight Defender here. So Defender for endpoint imports, the best way to use it, it's not the only way, is to import your devices from Intune. That's something that you go in and create the connection for. Intune will actually manage the security policies. So when you're in Intune, you'll set up a enrollment policy that, you know, turns on Defender real-time protection, turns on, you know, all these Defender services. Make sure that they're on. That's where the compliance comes in. If something disables real-time protection, it'll make the device fall out of compliance, and you'll see you have to address it. So Intune will control those sides of the policies, and Defender is really where the analytical part comes into it. That's where your alerting happens, your incident alerts will follow up into incidents. You might have 3 different alerts on a device. Microsoft will recognize that, create an incident, and then throw all the evidence, the details, affected services, users into that incident. So the Defender for Endpoint is really managing the higher level piece of it. It's also where EDR lives. So if you get into your A5 license or you're doing the A5 security add-on, that's where Microsoft's EDR lives. It's called Defender for Endpoint Plan 2. But all that needs, everything under there needs to be working well. So if Intune isn't set up properly, all your devices aren't in there, your devices aren't in compliance, Defender for Endpoint isn't really going to give you a whole picture of how secure your endpoints are. And again, below Intune, Entra, if you don't have active users, you don't have your inactive users filtered out, your stale devices filtered out, you're just going to have a lot of noise in there to deal with. So touching on Copilot, that's Microsoft's AI, and again, kind of integrated in Windows 11. That's where the conversation with it begins. So any version of Windows 11 includes Copilot, but there's a few different ways that you can use Copilot. If you just sign in with a personal account, everybody in Windows 11 will have you'll see a little Copilot icon on your taskbar. Used to have the word pre on it. It might still have that on there. And then if you're using Edge, they've actually built that into later Edge updates where there's a Copilot button on the right side bar that you get now. What you want to do is sign into Copilot on those 2 methods. So if you're using a personal Microsoft account, that just gets you like ChatGPT like searches. You're able to get answers, generate some content, do some analysis. It works just like ChatGPT. If you sign in with your work or school account, notice how it says Enter ID there, that's where you'll get the commercial data protection. So that's something that you can't get without typically a paid AI service. So Microsoft guarantees that your data is not used for their learning models and doesn't leave your account. So that's really important to make sure that your staff, when they're using AI, you know, through just the one built into Windows or in Edge, that they're signed in with their work account. If they end up generating specific lesson plans for a student, and they don't have to worry about what they're typing in, I guess is maybe the moral of the story. And then there's Copilot from Microsoft 365. That's the version that actually integrates with your Office applications. There are some dependencies on having stuff in the cloud, like when you're working on a document, it can't be just saved on a local device and not exist anywhere else. It needs to be saved in OneDrive. So it'll integrate with Word, Excel, PowerPoint, OneNote in that fashion. It'll integrate with Teams and then Outlook, but again, Outlook needs to have an Exchange Online mailbox set up for it to work properly. But that's the one, that's really the powerhouse of where their AI comes in, being able to generate PowerPoints, work with Excel data. They just added the ability to not work with tabled Excel data. So they're constantly adding features in there. The Copilot for Microsoft 365 does have a price attached to it. It's $30 per user per month. They haven't come out with an EDU specific SKU yet, but I hope at some point in the near future they do. But I think that's good to at least get a 1, 2, 3 licenses to at least start using. Give to your superintendent, your HR, people that generate a lot of content and documents to help them be more efficient in that aspect. So. And then Microsoft has a tremendous amount of resources out there for Copilot. So if you do get to this, there's a great link here for EDU specific resources. So Microsoft has kind of started generating how-to guides for making lesson plans and just ways to help teachers with content. If you're using Teams and classrooms inside of Teams, I know there's a plethora of things that they have built in with AI to help you with assignments and grading and just helping through those repetitive tasks. So as a big picture on things, again, that modernization piece is really where I think the greater conversation is. The end of support stuff is all coming and pushing that, but rather than just getting to Windows 11 and stopping there, really integrating some of these 365 services are going to help you a lot. I didn't touch on it too much, but with Entra ID, go back to Active Directory, it's kind of archaic. You don't really get a lot of data unless you have a third-party tool or logging utility that you purchase and plugged in. If we go sync to Entra, set up hybrid domain, you're able to see logins from users, when the login was, the IP address it came from, the 365 services that were logged into. So that's where you can start tracking security, watching where people are using their services. If you can block sign in from different countries, you can set up risk-based conditional access policies. So if Microsoft will identify if somebody's account's been compromised, if different IP addresses are signed into an account, close to the same time frame, it'll throw it into a risky user status, and then it's just kind of on you to manage that unless you have set up policies to kind of respond to that. But Microsoft tells you everything as far as those sign-ins are concerned, which you don't get with Active Directory. So, yeah, Anne, are there any questions that are hanging out there? Or...
Just get I don't know if it means that you've done such a good job of covering all this, but yeah, I don't have any questions in the chat. So if anybody has any questions they want to throw into the Q&A or the chat, we would love to hear them. I don't think that I've ever seen anything quite as much as the questions and stuff that we're getting around Microsoft. So one of the things that Lucas and I are talking about doing is hosting a Microsoft Mondays, which will have just an hour available for meetings where people can jump in, ask questions on their specific environment, and just kind of, it wouldn't be something where we would log in and fix your environment, but if you had a general question, we would be available and just be available for an hour every Monday. I would be curious if you guys want to throw in the chat if you think that's a good idea, if that's something you would take advantage of or not. We haven't started. It's just a concept that we're kind of pushing around. So would love to hear what you guys' thoughts on there. What are you sharing with us? Yes.
Well, I was gonna go back to that conditional access question.
Yeah,
To other ones out there.
sounds good.
So this is gonna look a little bit different from what that guy was seeing, but there's probably a little warning right below authentication methods here saying that Microsoft is currently not, or is currently moving all MFA methods to this, oh, what do they call it? Maybe Enter ID pane. But you'll be able to click manage methods, and there's like 3 different options on there where one will say like respect legacy methods, only use the authentication method policy page, and then there's one more in there. But you might have something, it might be set to respect legacy methods or use legacy methods first. And that could be throwing a wrench in your conditional access and the different policies that you set up. If you go back to the admin center, oops, this is where the per user MFA lived. And they kind of give you a bunch of warnings about not using that. That's all being managed in a different spot now. But if you click on legacy per user MFA there, this is where you might have it enabled specifically for people. And you'll have to go in and disable it. So it might,
That helps, Bob.
but yeah, again, this is the, oh, where'd it go? The Entra Admin Center. I can give this kind of preview what that looks like. This is just a demo tenant that Microsoft has out there. So this is what your users will look like when they're up here. If you have devices that are syncing from on-premise, those will show up in here and give you some management options. And if you have stale devices, it tells you, and you can just come in here and delete them. So this really gives you, even if you don't have that A3 license, I'd suggest syncing to 365, using that free A1 license, and just get better visibility, excuse me, into your logins and your devices, and just amplify what you're able to manage just from, instead of having just straight old Active Directory. So our thought, yeah, again, with Microsoft Mondays was just to have kind of an open meeting room, like Ann was saying, where you just come in and ask questions like Bob did. I don't know everything, but I've been through a lot of it. We didn't really cover licensing a ton. I talked about a little bit, but I could spend another hour talking about that. Every little piece to this Microsoft puzzle with modernization really can have its own hour webinar conversation. There's just so much to cover and run through. So if that's helpful, that's something that we're looking at doing, and hope it's beneficial anyway.
Thanks, Lucas. I know this is a lot to cover, and definitely appreciate you taking the time to go through a bunch of this. And I'm really excited about the concept of the Mondays, and I think it'll be really helpful. I do see a quick question about I can't seem to find Microsoft Visio in our Office 365. Is it supposed to be there? Do you know that one, Luke?
Visio is a separate license you need to subscribe to. So if you're sure that you've paid for a subscription, really how that subscription was delivered to you will be the difference. So if you work with a cloud solution provider, so ByteSpeed's a Microsoft CSP cloud solution provider. So if you bought a Visio license from us, we would need to have you add us as a partner to your Microsoft account, and we would deliver the license there. So if you have that set up, they could have delivered the license to the wrong account. You might have separate Microsoft accounts for different reasons. If you purchase it directly from Microsoft through the Microsoft Admin Center, the store there, it should show up as a license that you can assign. And I could share my screen and go back there too, but under billing and then licenses, it should show up there. Otherwise, right, if the business or organization you purchased it from likely hasn't delivered it yet or delivered it to the wrong place.